So you had this change. You had the British invasion, and the British invasion brought you the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and Herman's Hermits and Dave Clark Five and the Animals and all these bands. The music started changing. And kind of the Beatles, with their album Revolver and Rubber Soul and Revolver, they kind of started getting a little louder and a little more psychedelic. The next big change, I believe, was the arrival of the counterculture, or the hippie movement, for lack of a better term. And you really saw the counterculture come to life when the United States increased their involvement in the Vietnam War in 1965. And this movement, it coincided with the U.S. involvement from 65 until the peace treaty was signed in January 1973. And I really think the counterculture took a hit after the war went out, because they didn't have anything left to protest. But the music changed, the style changed, they started growing their hair long. To this day, I mean, when you look back, and it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right, or what your opinion on that was, when you look at the whole counterculture movement, it was very sizable, it was very strong. And really, I felt that when you look at the Beat generation, it dissipated and was kind of becoming absorbed by the hippie movement. Basically, the essence of the Beat generation, it functioned, when you look back, it functioned as a literary movement that concerned itself with freedom of expression. That's really what the Beats were doing. If the Beats had a protest, their protest was directed against the boundaries of academic poetry. They wanted to erase those boundaries. And then gradually, in turn, this focus on poetry by the Beats and this freedom of expression, it inspired the hippies who expressed themselves by protesting the Vietnam War, and that was really kind of the backbone. And the Beat generation was slowly being absorbed into the counterculture. Late 60s, we had another monumental change, and that was when you had what they call the riots in 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in April of 68 down in Memphis, Tennessee. Rioting broke out in cities across the country. In Washington, D.C., it was a very bad situation that weekend. It started a little north of 14th and U Streets, northwest, and spread out. And really what it did, it greatly altered the music scene in Washington, D.C., because I really think the only area of D.C. that was not affected by the riots adversely was Georgetown. A lot of the nightclubs over there kept, they stayed in business and rock and roll was still being played. But throughout the rest of D.C., you really had this monumental change. Most of the rock and roll nightclubs were shutting down. A couple, changed formats completely. I'm thinking of the Starlight up at 14th and Irving, which was kind of the heart of the riots. They remarkably stayed open somehow through that whole period, but they immediately changed their format. They started booking soul and R&B music. The Rocket Room was another place down New York Avenue. They kind of abandoned rock and roll and also adopted a soul format. Country music took a very bad hit. It really kind of extinguished the country music scene in D.C. Two well-known clubs, the Ozarks on 10th Street, the Boondocks, which is in the 800 block of K Street. They were actually burned to the ground in the riots and never reopened. And really, the riots signified a cultural transformation in the city, where Washington was transformed from being a white city to a black city, and a lot of the white customers in the suburbs just stopped coming into D.C. And of course, by this time, the Beat generation was largely a thing of the past. And as a sad epitaph, the Zanzinger building at 945 K Street Northwest on the corner of 10th and K, it had been vacant from after the riots. The Blue Sparrow shut down, and the Zanzinger building sat vacant. And then it was torn down in October of 1969, and it was basically a parking lot up until just about a year ago. They started digging the whole thing out. I guess they're going to put a big office building up on that corner of 10th and K. But really, when the Zanzinger building went down, it's kind of symbolic of the end of the Beat generation in Washington, D.C. What I'm going to do is take any questions you have about if there's anything you want to ask about the Beat generation or the Beatniks, or anything you want to share, or the nightclubs of that era. Does anybody have anything they want to ask or say or anything like that? Yeah.
You mentioned in the article a club called Underground at 1401 Columbia Road.
Right.
Do you know anything?
Yeah. The Underground was very short-lived, and it was 1401 Columbia Road, right on the corner of 14th and Columbia. And they mainly featured the jazz guitarist Bill Harris. But I'm not sure how long they were open. It couldn't have been, at the most it was like 9 or 10 months or something like that. And it was in a very, it was a tough location, Upper 14th Street, and I don't think it really ever gained a foothold, but it was very short-lived. And you go up there now, and I think 1401 Columbia Road is now a 7-Eleven. I don't think that's the original building there.
Oh, that's the original building.
That's the original building? Well, then it was, I guess it was in the basement of that building.
It's a U-shaped building. It could have been in.
And there's like a group of apartments right behind it or something like that. But no, it was.
Well, it's an apartment building.
Yeah.
It's a condo or something. No.
But no, it was basically a jazz nightclub, and Bill Harris was the featured jazz guitarist there for the duration that it was open. Yes.
That's the same Bill Harris that had the club on
Bigfoot.
Rhode Island Avenue.
Yeah, the jazz club. Yeah, Bill Harris, wasn't he in the? I should know this. He started off, wasn't he in the Clovers?
Yeah.
Clovers.
Yeah, he was
1951
One
to
Mint Julep.
59. Yeah.
He wrote
He
the
played in
bridge for
jazz,
that.
played in jazz clubs all over D.C., but yeah, Bigfoot was much later.
What did he write?
I'm sorry? Oh, he wrote the bridge to One Mint Julep. One Mint Julep.
Anything else? Yes.
Kerouac worked on the Pentagon
Yeah.
while I was here. Where did he stay? Where did he live at that point?
Good question. I have tried to research that, and there's almost no material available on that. I mean, it's very scant. I've read everything Kerouac's done. I've read just about every biography about him, which is, you get very tired of doing that eventually. He came to D.C. a couple times, and what you're alluding to, I think, was in, he left Columbia, and I should know this, but I'm suffering from information overload. I think it was in the fall of '41, or something like that.
Yeah, because I think the Pentagon was done in '43.
And he had a friend down here, and I don't know the name, I should. It's AJ, it's a Greek name, and he stayed at his friend's apartment. And I went and looked in the city directories for 1941 to find out where this guy's house or apartment was, and I couldn't do it. But he talks in one of his books, and I'm not sure if it's Vanity of the Louse or what, but he talked about driving to the Pentagon one morning. They were driving down 9th Street, and they tried running over people who were walking on the sidewalks, and he was just doing crazy stuff. And he made one other mention. He mentioned that when he was here, it was a limited time, but he started working, he gave up working at the Pentagon and started working at a restaurant in Northwest D.C. as a busboy. And he never gives you the name of the restaurant. He calls it a lunch cart. And he said that he moved in with a waitress. So the guy wasn't here more than like 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it was, and he was just, he had a fun D.C. experience, it sounded like. But now, the fellow that he stayed with, the Greek fellow, he has a son living in Massachusetts in their hometown up in Lowell. So, and he's in the phone book, so I was going to give him a call and see if his father ever mentioned, or where they were living or anything like that. But it was somewhere pretty close to 9th Street Northwest, and I don't know if it was an apartment or I guess it was an apartment, but he stayed with this friend, and kind of went back up to New York after that. But there are loose references to that. There's actually an article published in a Kerouac publication called Kerouac in Washington, 1941. I thought, well, this is great. It's going to tell you everything. It's a one-page article and it tells you nothing. So, it gives you very little information. But that's all I know about that.